Do you want to shut your brain off while you heal and just enjoy the game of WoW? Well, look no further because in today's video, I'm going to be ranking all 7 healer specs on how easy they're going to be in the War Within. Now, don't get me wrong, healing is the hardest role. Don't quote me on that, but it is going to be a hard time no matter what healer you play. This ranking is just going to be my opinion on which of the 7 healers is going to have the easiest time. You can make an argument for any healer to be at the top of this list, which I do encourage you to do down in the comments below. Let's quickly work through the bottom 4, the hardest 4, and then we'll make our way to the top 3, the easiest 3. And starting off with, I'm sure you guessed it, Discipline Priest. Now, they've made a lot of strides in making your actual rotation a lot more intuitive and a lot more of the same. So you're going to be pressing the same sequence of buttons, back to back to back to back. However, the problem is that you have to line up a lot of cooldowns, like lining up your Mind Blast, which is even more important now, having a Radiance charge or in Raid, having both Radiance charges, having your penance stacked up, and you also have to have game knowledge about when the damage is going to come in to know how much you should ramp or how much you should commit to each ramp, making this not a very beginner-friendly spec to pick up and play for new players coming into the War Within. And so far, it's looking like they're not going to play Premonition, but if they do opt to go that route, or if you as the player opt to go that route, that's just another like 5 layers of complexity on top of every other layer. So that's why this lands at the bottom in the ow, my brain hurts tier. Now, next up is RDruid, and normally they would land in the same tier, this ow, my brain hurts, because they always have to be pre-applying HOTS before the damage happens, a lot like how Disc Priest has to have knowledge of a fight before they come in, knowing when the damage is about to happen, and not reacting to the damage, but like pre-acting for the damage to come. Don't get me wrong, they still have to do this. I mean, if you come up to a pack as a RDruid with 0 HOTS applied, you're going to be having a tough time, but in the War Within, they've shifted some of the power out of the pre-applying your HOTS playstyle and into the reactionary playstyle. You're still not a full-on reactionary healer like some of the ones further in the list, but you do have a lot more tools than you used to, like 2 Swiftmen charges, Convoke being a great spell to press as damage happens or right after damage happens or even before damage happens. I mean, it's a pretty variable spell and good at almost any point in the damage. And with it being buffed, it's just going to make it easier for new players to have a good button to press that's easy to use. On top of that, it's worth mentioning that shifting more toward a Grove Guardian playstyle just simply makes the class a bit easier at the baseline. Sure, the skill ceiling might still be at the same level or might have even grown since like something like Shadowlands or Dragonflight or before Grove Guardians, but these guys being able to do a good chunk of the healing for you just means that that skill floor is that much higher. And with a lot of power in the Keeper of the Grove talent tree, you're incentivized to not go catweaving if you don't want to. It's still pretty likely that some people will catweave at the top level for that maximum damage, but having a secondary option that's equally powerful but in different ways, in a more defensive way, that makes it a little bit easier to pick up and play. So for those reasons, I think that's why it lands in the honorable mentions tier, which is where you're going to notice we get to the kind of proactive and reactive hybrid classes, starting off with Preservation Evoker. This is kind of in the middle of the honorable mentions. I didn't really consider it for the top 3, but I knew it wouldn't land down with Disc Priest. In raids, you do have a ramp to execute that is pretty timing dependent. Same with Mistweaver Monks, as you'll see in just a second. But a lot of the complexity in the spec comes from the options and the timings that you always have at your disposal. Should I Verdant Embrace to spot heal my ally, putting me where they're standing, or should I echo them to Verdant Embrace myself so that I sit put, but it takes 2 globals? There's just a lot of decision making like that. And then on top of that, one of your more powerful spells in both Raid and Mythic Plus is Stasis, giving you almost infinite possibilities, it feels like, but there's not infinite. There's a ton of possibilities and different 3-spell combinations that you can store up for any given moment. So a lot of branching tree decision nodes kind of give this spec its complexity. You always feel like there's a better way that you could have rotated or sequenced your buttons, but on that same note, you have a lot of different rotational buttons. Temporal Anomaly, Dream Breath, Verdant Embrace, Spirit Bloom, they all have very low cooldowns that you can cycle very often. And then once again, Stasis being a 1.5 minute cooldown to kind of couple with all of those to do them all again, basically doubling their power, is just a very powerful short cooldown rotation. Also worth mentioning, I know I always harp on this, but it's just a fact of how the spec is designed. 2 of your spells are positionally dependent. Well, I guess 3, because Verdant Embrace, we've already touched on that. But Temporal Anomaly, Dream Breath, it does matter where you, the player, stand. So if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if this is more important for new players, if your allies are out in Narnia, not in your range or not in front of you when you need them to be, you can just be caught with your pants down and have little to no control over that. So that is why it lands here, but not anywhere else. Now, moving on to Mistweaver Monk. In the past, one of the big things that makes Mistweaver Monk difficult is that you do 2 completely different playstyles in Raid versus Mythic Plus. So as a healer, you already have to learn basically 2 completely different specs, it feels like, using the same spells, but 100% different rotations, depending on which form of content you're going to do. It still kind of has that because Yu'lon is still looking dominant in raiding currently, but then Chi-Ji is looking dominant in Mythic Plus. However, I've mentioned recently that they've done a good job of closing the gap in raid. It's still not closed shut. Yu'lon is still just such a powerful cooldown for a raiding environment, but they've done a lot of pushes to make Chi-Ji be a little bit more competitive. Still, once again, not as competitive, but if you're a new player who loves playing Mistweaver at Mythic Plus, loves that fist weaving, punching, and kicking rotation, and then you want to take that into a raid environment, you don't have to relearn the spec. You can just play it in like a heroic raid and do 100% okay. There are quite a bit of interactions that you have to get used to over your time of playing Mistweaver. I only feel like recently, like within the last year, I've completely mastered every little interaction that there is in the spec. But up until then, I thought I knew everything, and then it felt like every single day I was learning something new. So for that reason, and the reason that you still have 2 branching play styles, that's why it didn't land in the top 3, but it does have a pretty simple Mythic Plus rotation, especially now that you're not really spinning crane kicking that often because of how much power has been restored into your other kicks in your Tiger Palm. So for that reason, that's why it's pretty easy, but I don't think it quite lands in the top 3. What does land in the top 3 though is Holy Paladin. Now, if you asked me about a few weeks ago, this probably would have been at the top of this list, but they've seen a lot of tuning, a lot of adjustments that have kind of just slowly knocked it down a bit, not just because of power, but because of how some of their stuff works and has been nerfed. But Holy Paladin is like your go-to reactive healer. If someone takes damage, you point at them, you click Holy Shock, and then boom, they're topped up a bit. It doesn't fully top them up. I think someone mistook me in one of my last videos thinking that I said that, but it just gives them a nice, juicy, instant spot heal. It's literally like whack-a-mole. If you've ever played whack-a-mole, someone's health drops low, you spot heal them, health jumps up a bit. So for that reason alone, how the class is designed, it would land toward the top of this list, but also they've made a lot of strides in removing some of the little complex niche parts of their talent tree and of their build. So first off, I have to mention Glimmer. A lot of people probably don't find this complex, but when you're first learning this spec, Glimmer was just an added layer of difficulty that you had to manage. Should I press Daybreak right now and snap all those Glimmers, or should I keep them all active? Should I sit on these Holy Shock charges so that I don't overlap my Glimmers because I know I'm about to Daybreak, or should I just Daybreak and then Holy Shock and kind of waste those Holy Shocks? You know, there was just a lot of decisions that you didn't realize that you were making in the moment with Daybreak and with Glimmer. So a lot of the effects of Daybreak have just been dumped into other spells, like Holy Shock just getting more upfront healing back instead of leaving a Glimmer behind. Also, Daybreak's little Holy Shock reverbing effect now has been given to your Divine Toll. Also worth mentioning, with the removal of Daybreak, you now have one less major cooldown that you have to have in your little cooldown rotation, going from like upwards of 6 down to 5. Every little bit helps. And then on top of all of this, they've restored a lot of the power back into your spenders, making your rotation actually a lot more intuitive than it was before. So now you're gonna spot heal, and then use your spender, and then spot heal, spot heal, spot heal, gaining holy power, and then use your spender. So instead of sitting at 5 holy power at some points just because your word of glory wasn't worth using at that moment, the rotation has just felt very intuitive. And not to mention, both of your hero talent trees don't really change the spec a whole lot. What I mean by that is that if you take Sun's Avatar or Herald of the Sun, you're really just adding power and adding effects onto a button that already exists. And then of all of the new buttons coming to all the healers, I would argue that Holy Armaments is probably the easiest one to comprehend and to use as a new player that has no idea what they're doing, because all you do is you give a sword to one of your allies that does damage, or you give a shield to someone that needs a shield. But it still does have a ton of cooldowns that all have, different best use case scenarios. And it also is still a melee healer, which is already pretty difficult in itself because you have more stuff to dodge. But it's a melee healer that every now and then could, depending on what build you go, weave in some casted spells, which, just like if you're a Mistweaver player, you know how much more difficult that makes your life. And on top of all of that, you have so many different utility tools on your belt that knowing the correct use of each one, like sack, or should I be immune here, like different things like that, it just makes you make a lot of decisions in the moment. So that's why it's not at the top of this list, but it still deserves its spot in the top 3. Moving on to the top 2, I think no matter who you ask, as long as they've played all 7 healers, they would put one of these 2 in the top 2 of this list. So we're going to start off with what I would put at the second place spot, and that is Resto Shaman. Just like Holy Paladin, as a Resto Shaman, you have a lot of different small cooldowns, like short duration cooldowns that you can use at different moments. You can stack them on top of each other if you need even more healing, or finding the best use for each one. So layering your cooldowns will be something that will take some time to master. However, the ease of your rotation, the simplicity of your spells will give you more brain power to be able to use on that. You need to do damage well. Do you need to do AoE or single target? If you need to do AoE, press your 1 AoE damage spell in Chain Lightning. If you need to do single target, press Lava Burst if it's available, Lightning Bolt if it's not. Same with healing. Do you need to do AoE healing? Press Chain Heal. If you need to do single target healing, press one of your 2 single target healing buttons. Are you at cap of Riptide, or does someone need spot healing and they don't already have Riptide on them? Use one of those charges. Maintain your Riptide hot, maintain your Chain Heal, and after that it's just kind of point and click whack-a-mole, just like Holy Paladin, but a little bit easier because you're out in range and you don't have a bonus resource to manage. And just like I was just talking about with Holy Paladin, Resto Shaman does have a pretty intuitive rotation because of how many different things that you just have to upkeep or maintain, like your Earth Shield on your tank and on yourself. So if that's about to fall off, just reapply that. Your Healing Rain, if it's about to end, or if you need to replace it, if you're not going Totemic Shaman, then recast it. Try to maintain Riptide on as many people as possible. All 3 of those sources will just spill healing into any damage that's taken on your allies. And then after that, you can cast whichever healing spell feels right in the moment, or put down one of your totems to help you do the healing. Which, speaking of totems, Totemic Shaman adds just another layer of simplicity to the spec, because all of your healer totems, like the ones that actually do healing, and your Mana Tide totem, they're also just going to cast a free Chain Heal zipping around doing AoE healing. So in panic modes where you're on the move and you can't sit there and plant and cast, your Spirit Walker's Grace is down, and you're just panicking because you're not used to the spec, you can just spam all of your totems if you really need to, and just get a ton of AoE healing. Not to mention Healing Stream and Healing Tide Totem, both putting those down can do a ton of AoE healing, helping you, the healer, out in your decision making, because health bars are just going to be springing up with all of your hots on people and one of these totems down. Or if you opt for Farseer Shaman, it adds another layer of ease in giving you 3 charges of Riptide, so making that a lot easier to maintain on your whole party or to spread in your raid group, while also just rewarding you for casting your spells, your healing spells. Either press Unleash Life and get a free Ancestor, or cast 3 healing waves or healing surges and get a free ancestor. So the more you're just spamming healing, if you're a new player and just want to spam heal and learn a spec, this is just such a good one to pick up and play. And on top of that, just like Holy Paladin, you also have a ton of different tools for different scenarios, but they work a little differently than Holy Paladins. Holy Paladins are utility buttons that you can use on your allies depending on incoming damage or incoming mechanics. But Resto Shaman have a lot of offensive tools, meaning you can do an AoE stun, or you have a short duration ranged kick, or you have an AoE knockup, or you have a totem that just cleanses poisons if a dungeon has a bunch of poisons, which, spoiler alert, some of them do in The War Within. So for all of those reasons, that's why Resto Shaman ends up at the top of this list, but it does still have some things keeping it from being my personal rank 1 or number 1 spec. So what takes the trophy? What's at the top, the easiest spec to pick up and play in The War Within? Well, that has to go to Hpriest. Hpriest kind of takes all the talking points that I made about Resto Shaman, simplifies them, and then takes those on. For example, you do also have some things that you need to maintain, meaning once this button comes off cooldown, press it right away. Mainly being Prayer of Mending. You never want to sit with that on cooldown. Just press that often. You'll get a ton of healing in a dungeon or in raid. You also don't want to sit on either of your holy words at 2 stacks too long, but luckily those are so powerful and do exactly what you need in different moments, so you rarely ever feel the need to sit at 2 charges. Aside from that, in Mythic Plus you only really have one major healing cooldown in Apotheosis. You do have major cooldowns for Raid and Divine Hymn. You also have Salve instead of Apotheosis and Raid, but that's it. And the other 2 healers that land in this top tier, the top 3, just have a lot more cooldowns that you have to know the correct uses for. But here for Hpriest, if you need to do big healing in Raid, if it's your time to shine, press Salve. If not, press Divine Hymn. Stack those 2 on top of each other if you want to do some massive healing, like go crazy, but you don't really have that many options, which to some is a bad thing, but when you're just looking for an easy healer, it's a great thing. It's less that you have to learn. Also, on top of that, no matter what build you go as a Hpriest, your rotation is pretty simple. It's pretty cut and dry. You play around like a certain few talents depending on how you build. So in Mythic Plus, if you want to kind of be that whack-a-mole healer, you can go the Lightweaver build and just flash heal, heal. Flash heal, heal. And it's kind of funny that the spells are named that. You got heal, you got flash heal if you want it to be quicker, so it's so simple. I think it was designed to be this simple healer, or at least they've maintained that throughout WoW's lifetime. But yeah, if you need spot healing, you cast either of those spells. If you need even more spot healing, you press your holy word Serenity. If you need AoE healing, you can use Sanctify, or you can just cast flash heals around, getting value from your Trail of Light, and then also getting value from, once again, your Lightweaver. Now, don't get me wrong, this spell does have a lot of complex things. Every class does, every spec does. So finding a good time to use your Apotheosis to crank out massive damage is a thing. It's not that common, but you can, using your Chastise and then using your Holy Fires to reset your Chastise during your Apotheosis window, and then cycling big damage that way. It still exists, but that does leave you without your major cooldown for big damage instances. But for the most part, if you're a new player, if you're new to a spec looking for just the easiest spec to play, you don't really do that. You don't really risk wasting Apotheosis in that way in Mythic Plus. So for that reason, this spec will just be the easiest to play, to pilot. All of this, everything on this list is not including the factor of, or the variable of, how powerful they are. So for example, Hpriest, although its rotation is very simple, imagine a world where it's just dog, it's just the worst healer. All of its healing spells do 1 healing. Then obviously you're going to have a hard time. But in a vacuum coming into the War Within, which we all are, we all have the veil over our eyes. Yes, we've been playing in the beta, but that's a beta environment. Things change before it hits live. So that's why I kind of took all of these healers, their kits and their rotations in a vacuum and constructed this list that way. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you found it fun or got some good, useful information in your journey to pick your main in the War Within. I know I'm kind of narrowing my eyes down on which ones I'm going to main, but for the time being, I still have some decisions to make. Guys, while you're still here, make sure and like the video down below and make sure that you're subscribed. We are coming up on 10,000 subscribers, which is like mind blowing. I cried when I hit 100 subscribers. I'm not even kidding. So it's mind blowing. So click that button. Also, while you're down there, check out the Patreon link down in the description because that's what keeps my lights on. Huge shout out to these guys. These are the patrons of the channel. It would not be possible if it weren't for them. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. I try to keep it short. Hopefully I did a good job. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.